Good afternoon and welcome to the Archaeology of Connecticut. I'm Glenda Rose, President of Friends of the Office of State Archaeology, here with State Archaeologist Dr. Sarah Sportman and former FOSA President Scott Brady. Today's program is a little different in that our guests will be discussing their work abroad. Here in Connecticut, we value our archaeology as it tells us about the indigenous people and European settlers who built our country, but ours is what I call nouveau archaeology, compared with much of the rest of the world. I recall being on vacation in Toulouse, France, and walking by a town park where I saw a piece of a Roman wall, and I was amazed. And you never know, but I don't expect to go out even in Windsor with my metal detector and find a bag of ancient gold coins or some Viking jewelry. So it'll be very interesting to hear about the work and findings in countries with older cultures. And now here is Sarah to introduce our guests who will tell us more.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to tonight's show. We'd like to welcome our three special guests tonight, Roxanne Lebenzon, Jayson, Gill, and Johan Jarl. All three are graduate students in the PhD program in anthropology at UConn, and all three are archaeologists in Connecticut who work in other places, in this case in Israel and Georgia and Armenia. They work in different time periods, looking at major transitions or developments in human history, using a variety of methods and analytical techniques, but dealing with some of the most common types of archaeological data we find in all periods: animal bones, plant remains, and lithic artifacts. So we're thrilled to have you all on the show tonight and learn about your research and your experiences. Can we just go around and have each of you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your research interests?
Sure. Hello. Hi. Yes, my name is Johan. I'm an archaeobotanist. So I study plant remains, real old plant remains. Working primarily in Georgia and Armenia, so in the Southern Caucasus, and focused on paleoenvironmental reconstruction of the middle upper Paleolithic transition around 45,000 years ago. So a little older than
what
we used to. Yeah.
All right, my name's Jayson. I study the lower and the middle Paleolithic time periods in the Armenian highlands and Southern Caucasus, so modern-day Armenia, modern-day Georgia, and some of the surrounding regions. And so I'm working in periods anywhere from about 700,000 to about 30,000 years ago. I really focus on the transition between the lower and middle Paleolithic, so looking at about 500 to 300,000 years ago. And I look at stone tools mostly and digital methods on understanding and analyzing stone tools.
Great. My name's Roxanne Lebenzon. I'm a zooarchaeologist, or at least trying to be one. Just wrapping up my 6th year in the Department of Anthropology at UConn. And I am interested in untangling the causes of body size and shape variability in animal bones during the Pleistocene-Holocene transition, so about 20,000 to 7,000 years ago in the southern Levant and specifically in Israel. And like Jayson, I'm also interested in using digital methods. So I've been working with a laboratory in Israel at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem called the Computational Archaeology Laboratory to develop some new computational tools and quantitative tools to look at animal bones.
Well, we're going to untangle a lot of this as we go. But I guess I just kind of wanted to start with the thought that sometimes it's hard to get across as archaeologists when we're talking to the public about the necessity of taking a holistic approach in archaeology that looks at humans and our ancestors in terms of a whole range of factors, right? Archaeologists, we tend to get focused on one thing, like our little analytical area. But here in New England, we're generally looking at pretty short time spans with well understood environmental shifts and the ability to tightly date sites and tie them to certain time periods and environmental conditions, because we have a pretty solid understanding of that at this point. But you all deal with much deeper time periods and broader scales of ecological and behavioral change with very different challenges. So that's part of what I want to talk about, because I think it's a thread that ties all your work together in many ways. You're all looking at kind of transitional periods and major periods of change in people and their behavior. But I guess we should start kind of just teasing out some of what you just told us.
How about just defining some of the words that they used?
Sure.
Just one note from the board here, and that is that we love this program because it attracts actually a broad audience, far more than what Brian Jones had hoped it would ever do. And one thing that you should remember is in no way do we want to be over people's heads if we can avoid it. And you guys are massively smarter than the average board tech here. So even for my sake, to keep me included in this, if you could make your presentations a little more accessible with fewer syllables, that'd be fantastic.
We can definitely do that.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Yeah. So I guess because we are archaeologists, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start chronologically. I'm going to start with Jayson because he deals with the oldest time periods in the group. So can you explain, when you're talking about lower, middle, and upper Paleolithic, what the time periods are? You did a little bit, but also what species we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a fair question. So when I'm talking about the lower Paleolithic, right, to ground it in human evolutionary terms, what we're talking about is anywhere from pretty much with the beginning of Homo, maybe a little bit before the beginning of our genus Homo. But really looking at what I'm doing is the beginning of like Homo erectus, so 1.8 million years ago. And, right, they're using hand axes, right? These bifacially worked large cutting tools, really beautiful teardrop-shaped pieces that pretty much persist until you get to the later middle, or the middle Paleolithic later in time. But of course, they're not the only species that use these hand axes. You're also looking at Homo heidelbergensis, Homo antecessor, any of these other kind of middle Pleistocene hominins that predate Neanderthals and modern humans. And then when you get to the Middle Paleolithic, or what you would call the Middle Stone Age in Africa, that's when you kind of see that technology disappear. You see modern humans and Neanderthals appear, and you see them using completely more diverse, variable toolkits. But a lot of that starts with the introduction of what we call Lavawa technology, which are these prepared cores, this way to prepare this massive stone to create a repeatable flakes of shapes and sizes, essentially. So it's recombining ideas from earlier in time to create this really well-prepared technology that you can predetermine what you're making off of that massive stone. And that, again, that's both modern humans and Neanderthals are using it. So right, there's a lot of questions on why this kind of transition between those two technologies happen, and how it relates to human evolution over this long period of time.
So it's like the first production method where you're whacking off or banging off and getting flakes or blades that are consistently the same? Yeah,
that's the idea behind it, would be predetermination.
And that's a big change in what's been going on prior to that.
Yeah, because prior to that, in terms of the kind of core technologies that you're seeing, it's maybe more amorphous, more kind of expedient style of production. Now, those hand axes are beautifully made, obviously, and that kind of same shaping philosophy probably goes into those later prepared cores. But in terms of producing flakes, it's a big shift in how our ancestors are producing things.
So is it also kind of reflecting a cognitive shift in terms of like more planning, or more kind of like...
So I think that's one of the big questions, right? Is this actually related to the evolution, right? Is there a change in our cognition that goes along with this? And honestly, maybe not. This kind of technology shows up a little bit before you get Neanderthals or modern humans. That's not to say that it couldn't be cognitive shifts happening earlier in kind of Homo heidelbergensis or earlier species, but we just can't track that. Not we can actually track cognition at all in the past. But that's some of the arguments. It is cognitive shifts. Some people think it has something to do with environmental shifts, maybe movement away from raw material sources and away from river environments and into more unknown regions where you need something more prepared and more dependable.
So can you give us a little sense of what's going on with the environment in general in these time periods? I know it's like a huge span of time to cover really quickly, but...
So, right, you're essentially, this is all happening over glacial and interglacial periods, and most of our evidence is really coming from these interglacials or interstadial periods where the environment's much better. So it's really hard to tell how the environment's interacting with the people and the technology, and especially in places where I work where we don't have a really good paleo-environmental record. We don't really know what's happening in the Caucasus over much of this time. It's something we're really trying to work on with people like Johan's work, Alex Brittingham's work, trying to get these better ideas of what's happening, and so we can understand what the environment's actually influencing our behavior, or if it's really an environmental influence.
It's really interesting. It's hard to imagine dealing with such a deep time period.
Yeah, because right, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of years, and multiple environmental shifts therein, and probably multiple migrations through these regions, and differences in groups and group sizes and social structures. So
yeah, I mean, I get frustrated when dates are like within 100 years. I'm like, how can you possibly know anything?
Yeah, I mean, when you get a date where you're like, well, it's plus or minus 6,000 years. So.
How many generations is that?
Which could put it like either side of a large environmental shift too.
Right.
So it's, without more environmental background, it's kind of hard.
Excellent. I guess so. The other question I had about yours is that you talked about using 3D modeling in your work.
Yeah, so a lot of my dissertation work is focused on using 3D scan data, both as a conservation tool, because I can bring the scans back with me. I can't bring the artifacts back from the Armenian highlands. So it's actually nice. I can go back and take any measurements or anything I want on them, but also using kind of more cutting edge methodology, which is landmark-based geometric morphometrics. And it's something that Roxy also does. And I'll break that down a little bit because I know that's a really...
explain it.
So it's a way of quantifying shape. It comes from biology. It was originally a way of understanding how shape changes with size, and that was really what it came from, biology, in looking at animals. But what I use it for is to look at changes in shape of, say, within hand axes over time, and trying to understand what might be causing that. I'm also tracking the morphological relationship between these hand axes that I study and between these Lavawa prepared cores that I study. And there's actually, in some regions, there seems to be a continuity there. And then I also work in Great Britain as well on museum collections. So in other regions like that, there doesn't seem to be continuity. So technological continuity might mean population continuity, but it might not. But it's one of the hypotheses that I'm working within, is that in some regions we see population continuing to live within the same region, and slow changes in their stone tools through this statistical method. Whereas in other regions there might be a complete break, and then new populations moving in, bringing new technologies with them.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. All right, let's move on to our next time here. So Johan, you talk, you're looking at the transition between the Middle and Upper Paleolithic, right, in terms of environmental change?
Yes. And I don't measure anything. It's very straightforward. I look at things and I say things, and that's that.
That sounds like my kind of archaeology. So can you give us a little bit of a breakdown of the date range again, if you can just remind us of that, and also just what's occurring during this transition in terms of human behavior and environmental change, why it's an interesting period to study?
So there's the time range that I'm looking at really is, I would say 60 to 30,000 years ago, with the actual sort of transition. So when we're going from possibly earlier hominins like Neanderthals, and we start seeing modern humans appearing more frequently on the landscape, and their associated technologies, which is sort of what Jayson and some of our other colleagues work with, is trying to kind of tease apart through measuring angles, I guess. But I'm really focusing right now on a period about 45,000 years. We have some evidence that suggests that in northern Georgia something is happening there. But I'm utilizing sites from across the Southern Caucasus, and because we're working with such, I mean, Jayson works with huge, enormous times, right? But I too, this is still a 30,000 year period. and getting dates from older sites can be tricky, depending on what we have as material that's available. So we're kind of, as long as they're kind of within that range, I like to look at it and see what sort of comes out, and then hopefully it's something useful. But it does.
I mean, we all hope that.
Yeah.
Thanks for a
what we're
much
in it
better
for.
dissertation, right?
Yeah, I think that's the archaeologist's prayer. Please, please, please. But it does. When I think about it, I try not to think too much. But when I do, and I think about these time periods, we might be looking at something we get a date back that's, plus minus a few thousand years. And the site we're looking at has been interpreted as a seasonal hunting camp. So somewhere within a span of, let's say, 4,000 years, for some parts of the year, we don't know how many years, people would return there, and we are looking through, what they left behind. But when you start thinking like that, things get real complicated real quick. And you start making up scenarios.
Time for broad generalizations.
Yeah,
at that point,
yeah.
If you wanna,
But if we can at least get, as time progresses, we get better and better dating, and as time progresses, we get higher and higher resolution based on the work that's being done.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things I want to point out about things you just said, because the region that the two of us work in, you said like maybe modern humans, maybe Neanderthals, and it's a really important thing because we don't have great bone preservation in our area, and it's partially due to the volcanics and the soils that with this volcanic input aren't great for bone preservation. And we don't have a ton of cave sites. We have a lot of open air sites, so it complicates it. So we have just a few sites around with hominin remains, unless you count like Dmanisi, which is in our region that has a ton of really early Homo erectus remains, but mostly we don't have much to go on. So within the periods we're working, we're making educated guesses based on what's in the surrounding regions. And the second thing about dating is the volcanics also mess up a lot of dating. They're really great when you find the volcanic input in a site, say like a lava or an ash that we can date. But for things like OSL, which I won't get into, but in sediment dating, it can really complicate the matter. So we're left with trying to find the dates we can when we can, and most of what we're working on is out of radiocarbon range, right? Once you get into kind of Johan's period, you really get into radiocarbon, and we have some good radiocarbon from kind of that middle to upper Paleolithic transition. But yeah, so we're working within the constraints of this whole region, which can be a temperamental region.
Yeah, part of why I've been kind of pulled into this whole mess is because we just don't have a lot of organic material of any sort, which makes radiocarbon dating tricky. And that, but we are seeing, and I'm really impressed with this. You see this persistent work that's been happening over the last 2 decades almost in the region, and we keep seeing these dates and these sites. We keep seeing new information coming out, better, higher resolution, and it's just people are just grinding, They keep going at it, and they try new methods, and technologies advance, and they come up with new ideas, new approaches, and it really, I would say that from an archaeological standpoint, and I think Jayson will agree with me here, that compared to say when some of the people we work with started working in the region, we know so much more. We have learned so much more.
Yeah, we just got back from a set of conferences in Portland where we had a whole session on our region, and it was kind of night and day from, say, 2 decades ago. And we had, some discussants who had been working in the region from that far back who were just kind of blown away with the amount of work that's really gone on. But we still have so many questions left to answer. And that's kind of where Johan's helping fill in the gap with phytolith studies.
Do you want to explain what a phytolith is for
Preferably
our
not.
listeners?
Sure.
No, so as we mentioned here, there's not a lot.
Mind-blowing to me. Phytoliths are mind-blowing to me.
They are.
It's magic.
So when you're looking at archaeobotanical remains, there are certain things. In later time periods in particular, it's common to look at seed remains or charcoals or wood remains. But with some exceptions, and there are very few, we don't get those in the Southern Caucasus in these time periods. So we also struggle to find pollen. Pollen does not preserve well in this region, again, at these time periods. So a few years ago, I was approached by a Angela Bruck, who's a archaeologist. Well, I don't know if she calls herself that, paleontologist. So she works with pollen in Germany, about doing phytolith analysis and to try out to see if that might help. Phytoliths are made from silica, so they're glass essentially, which makes them really resistant to pretty much everything. You can burn them, you can drop them in acid. In fact, as part of my process, I do drop them in acid, and I burn them. You can do almost anything with them, and they'll sort of survive. So they're glass, but they are imprints of the cells within plants. It's kind of like an ice tray, is how I like to think of it. You have groundwater that the plants take up, and in that groundwater is liquid silica. And that kind of fills these spaces just like water would an ice tray. And when the plant dies, the silica has sort of, silicified, it's hardened. So you remove the ice tray, the plant, and what you have is an imprint of whatever space it filled. And so I go through the not at all tedious task of trying to figure out which cell belongs to which plant.
But they are diagnostic.
They are diagnostic to various degrees and in various ways. And I'm taking currently a more of a, what I call an assemblage-based approach. So I'm not looking at the individual sort of phytoliths so much as I'm looking at the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them and trying to kind of look at the statistical and the quantitative, so the sort of essentially how the numbers add up in different places. And then I compare those different places and how the numbers add up to each other.
Not to get us sidetracked, but how long does that process take?
Oh my God, it takes a while. It's so first of all, the first problem is that these are all in the sediment or the soil, right? So they are all in the dirt. And in the dirt, there's a lot of other stuff, and I don't need that other stuff. That obscures, like they physically, all these other things, minerals and whatever else, physically obscures the phytoliths. They are in the way. So the first thing I have to do is get rid of all of that stuff. And so that's a whole process that takes me about a week to do when it's a lot of acids and spinning things really fast. And it's a whole bunch of laboratory work.
A week for a liter of sediment, or how much sediment are we talking about?
Liter, you're crazy.
See, I have no idea, and I'm an archaeologist.
So I normally do, I can do several sort of batches at the same time, but I tend to do 16 samples at a time, and each sample is 5 grams.
Oh wow.
Of material.
way off.
So it's not a lot. These phytoliths are extremely small. They are, the biggest ones will be, you have exceptions to every, but let's say the biggest on average might be 50 microns.
So it's all microscope work.
Yeah, so this is very, very tiny. I use 400 times magnification when I look at these things. So you imagine your own vision and then 400 times better than that to see these things.
And is it good? Can you really see them?
Yes, I can see them. Yes. I have gotten pretty good at seeing them at this point.
So you were talking about your comparative. You're comparing these bulk kind of assemblages. Mm-hmm. And so what you're comparing it to is like a known environment, and then trying to draw the conclusion that potentially the environment was, if not exact, similar to what we're seeing, like a woodland or a swamp area, or is that fair?
That is very astute, because there are many different ways to do this, to use phytolith analysis, and some of other ways I will be using, and I am using. But the primary way right now, because the big questions are, like Jayson was saying, environment. How does the environment, how may that have played a role in the sort of lives of our ancestors at this point in time in this region? And to do that, we have taken soil samples from modern areas where we know exactly what the vegetation is. And then I look through them, and just for the record, those soil samples, you think this is like the first few centimeters, like the first couple of inches of topsoil? The phytoliths in there can have an age range of several hundred years. So it can get a little tricky there too. But we take these, and because we know exactly what was there, we know that this was a forest, it was a conifer forest, it was a broadleaf forest, et cetera, et cetera. I take a bunch of these different samples from all over the region, and we look at what each one looks like. And then we take the archaeological samples and compare those to these known samples. And I've literally just, when we were at this conference in Portland, which was last week, presented some preliminary data on this that I had just gotten, that I just sort of produced, which I don't want to say too much, but it is showing some possible shifts in environment that once this sort of batch of samples is finished, I think is quite convincing. And then we're looking at environmental change over a shorter time period than what we have had in this region up until now.
Which then you can kind of look at the archaeological data in the context of that and provide a more holistic picture of what's going on.
Exactly.
I mean, because any of us who've really kind of done any archaeology, I think, understand stressors in the environment or lack of stresses in the environment really dictates what people are doing and how they're doing things. So I think that's incredibly important to kind of understand what's going on, which then defines everything else.
I agree.
And one nice thing about what Johan's doing compared to, say, like the pollen work that usually kind of people use for these same kind of signatures, pollen gives you more of a large scale picture, regional scale picture, because of how easy pollen moves. Phytoliths don't really move. And we're working in a region with a lot of complete differences in terms of ecological zones, highlands, lowlands, everything in between. So we're getting more of a very focused picture of what was happening right around the site during these time periods instead of what was generally the region, which may not tell us nearly as much.
Yeah, it's an absolutely incredible region. If you look at the diversity of plants that are there. One of the botanists that we work with the Armenian, it's the Armenian Botanical Garden, I think, was saying, I don't know if it's true or not, but that there is...
But I'll say it on the radio.
I'm going to say it on the radio. It sounds really good, so I'm going to say it. That in the Southern Caucasus, so that's a very small region, there is as much biological diversity as there is if you were to travel from Israel all the way up to northern Russia in a straight line.
Yeah.
And it is a biodiversity hotspot with over 6,000 species of plant. And that's another thing that's very interesting to us is Jayson was talking about these glacial periods when it gets cold and it gets warmer and back and forth there. How we believe, and there is some evidence that parts of the region at least was a sort of refuge. So as the climate got colder everywhere else and things started to die because of that, there were parts of this region that allowed these plants to continue living. And so then when the weather got warmer, these plants kind of spread out again. And we're very interested, I am very personally very interested to see to what extent that might have been the case across the region more broadly. We believe it's Georgian and Armenian botanists are incredible, and they've done some really amazing work. And they are quite confident that in the western parts of Georgia, so that's at the edge of the Black Sea, it gets very hot, and it's zero altitude. Yeah. It's extremely hot and extremely humid, and it is believed that that kind of climate has persisted for a long period of time, which have allowed things to grow there during these kind of cold periods and stay there, and then.
Yeah, well, those little microclimates would seem to me would be the perfect way to preserve faunal assemblages, right? Certain animals can survive until the climate becomes conducive to them to spread out, and people are always chasing animals again. So another connection to why maybe people are doing things there. Yep.
They do have dinosaur remains there. We don't do dinosaurs. I just want to be clear about that. We don't do dinosaurs, but we all think dinosaurs are super cool.
Yeah.
One of these days we should just do a paleontology show.
Sure, yeah.
Just because everybody really likes them.
I think half my family still thinks that I'm a paleontologist.
Right? The two questions you get when you tell somebody you're an archaeologist is how many dinosaur bones have you found?
Yes.
And how much treasure have you found?
Yeah.
Yeah.
None.
No.
Yeah, never.
For both. Well, it depends on how you define treasure.
Yeah.
Well, you were there when they found actual treasure.
We did find one piece of pirate treasure
Yeah.
at a site in Glastonbury, so I
Wow.
can now say that I found treasure, but still no dinosaur bones.
So let's move forward in time a little bit more and talk to Roxy about bones, which are my personal favorite part of the archaeological record. I'm a little bit biased. So
I'm
you're
right there with you.
Yeah, I figured. So you're looking at a much later time period, right, and another big shift in human behavior and development, and also environmental changes relating to the shift from people primarily relying on like a foraging lifestyle to farming.
Yes.
Right. And that's, of course, the origins of agriculture, and that shift have been a major research focus for forever, right? People have always been really interested in that because it has all kinds of implications for human behavior and things like that. But so what is interesting about that time period to you?
It's an incredibly dynamic time span. So we're talking roughly 20,000 to about 7,000 years ago, and it encompasses significant climatic fluctuations. So we have a lot of dramatic climate swings. It's the end of the last glacial maximum, and then there's a period of warming brought on by a sudden cold snap, really dramatic cold snap called the Younger Dryas, which also impacted things in Connecticut as well. So you might have heard, somebody's probably talked about this on the show. Okay. Yeah. So the Younger Dryas, and then there's also a period of Holocene warming and a really warm and wet period. So there's a lot happening in a roughly small time frame. And coinciding with all this climate drama, there's also broad changes in human organization. There's increasing sedentism, which leads to population growth. We see increasing animal management, ultimately agricultural societies, and full-blown domestication. And so it's such a perfect place to examine how different environmental and anthropogenic impacts or how we can use animals to inform us on these larger processes. So I'm focused on using animal bones as proxies of these larger events. And Israel is a great place to do that. So I'm very fortunate to have access to wonderful material. We have good preservation. I feel a little guilty sitting across the table from Jayson and Johan. We have great preservation. I have really robust faunal assemblages. And beyond that, kind of linking back to Johan, we use modern skeletal material first. So I am basing the first part of my dissertation, which is largely exploratory, on identifying specific shape markers in animal bones that are related to different environmental and human impacts. And this links to a whole field of study called ecomorphology, which basically, in a nutshell, basically animal bones, animal morphology can be determined largely by how an animal navigates its landscape, its local ecology. So what is it eating? How is it moving across its landscape can have a direct impact on its bone. And that's because bones are plastic. So they change through a lifetime of a bone, of the animal. So it's pretty neat. And there's been a lot of interesting work that's looked at how an animal locomotes, so how it walks through its landscape, how that will impact its morphology. And that's because tendons and ligaments and muscles all connect to bones. And when you have to run really fast in a big open place versus, effectively trail run. So if we look at you, if you go out and you run on a track all day where it's open and you
Well,
can
that's not going to happen. Let's be real here.
Like, don't look at me.
Hypotheticals. I'm not a
you're
runner
talking to the
either.
wrong crowd.
I don't even think I own running shoes, so that's okay. I'm right right there with you. Versus going for a trail run where you have to jump over logs and stumps, and there's a lot of trees that you're weaving in and out. Your joints are going to require different things. And so there's this whole field of study, ecomorphology, that's been doing some really interesting shape work. So the integration of these new quantitative 3D shape techniques, so using what Jayson talked about a little bit, geometric morphometrics, to link kind of, it's like the calling card of a factor or a variable is this shape change. That's an isolated, you can pinpoint what a variable with a direct result on a bone, and then we are going to use that information to inform us on the archaeological record.
So can you give us an example of a shape change that's associated with a factor?
Sure. So I am still pending results. So if you talk to me in the summer, I'll be able to come back on the show and give you guys my update. But for example, there's a really interesting paper by Harbers et al., a big team on pigs. And they were looking at pig calcanea, so the heel bone of a pig. And they were able to determine a specific facet on one of the sides of the calcanea that changed when a pig was in captivity within one generation. Wow. So the way that they took wild caught pigs, they reared them in captivity, they killed them and looked at their feet, and they were able to see actual changes within one generation, which is pretty phenomenal. So that's one example. There's a lot of climate work with extant bovids in Africa that look at changing grassland. So work with the lower, like the hind limb, but also with the humeri, so the front part of the animal, animal legs. And there have been some interesting work even for draft reindeer, so they can see changes when when reindeer were domesticated in their front limb, forelimb,
interesting.
Or
does
used
it seem
as
to be
domesticated.
more associated with limb bones, at least at the work that's been done so far, or is that not fair?
I think that's a hard question because people use different elements, and when you're in archaeology, you're always, working in archaeology, you're always limited by preservation. And so a lot of work has been done on those dense preserving bones, so things like the distal humerus or the distal tibia, and also the ankle bones, which are dense and have no marrow, so like the astragalus or the calcaneum. However, you also have to think about weight-bearing bones. So if you're thinking about how an animal is locomoting, you're going to, the way that it walks, if it's weight-bearing, it's going to have some sort of shape change. But also, one of the bones that I'm going to be scanning this summer is the mandible, and I'm focusing on the mandibular condyle. And there's been some really neat work with zoo animals that showed diet change in the mandibular condyle just because of the way that their muscles and their chewing. So that's another way to get a diet. So I'm interested in diet, and I'm also interested in environment and the way that people can find everything.
What kind of animals are you looking at? Is it a range, or are you really focusing?
I'm honing in on gazelle. And the reason why I am working with gazelle is because they are the predominant prey item during this time period. And so we have fantastic faunal assemblages, but also as the predominant prey item, you know that people are really going after them. So there is some sort of relationship. And gazelle have also been utilized by zooarchaeologists who work in this region for decades. This has been they provided a wealth of information, and people have really used their body size as indicators of climate change and of human-animal interactions, including even tracking things like human mobility and things from gazelle. And so it's kind of a logical step for me to add something new to the picture by coupling this history of research on gazelle and then adapting it for some sort of shape analysis. But I'm hoping, and not just hoping, I should be more confident, that once I identify areas of shape change, that this can be adapted, or at least the methods can be used by zooarchaeologists who work in any time period, or not even zooarchaeologists if you're interested as a biologist or an ecologist. So I'm hoping that it has a wide, it has applicability
Proof of concept.
beyond. Yes.
So with the animals, generations are shorter, much shorter than with humans. Is it possible that if there's a physical change within one generation, can there be other behavioral changes in a similar period, like migratory tendencies, like rising waters on the shoreline here threatening the salt marsh sparrow population because they're sand nesting animals, and with the rising waters, where are they going to nest? Because if they go to the grasses, that's where their predators are. So it's a whole issue of how are they even going to survive? If you can change in your construct when one generation, can behavior change as well?
I don't have a full lit review on this, but from my own personal opinion, yes, I definitely think it's conceivable that, we're seeing it in the bones. So, of course, bones are the remnant of some sort of behavior in a way. So if we're able to see that, I would say that locomotion is a behavior. So I think that this definitely...
It's kind of contraindicative of what we've been told forever, right? Evolution takes a really long time.
Yes, well,
exactly. Yeah, that's yeah.
So this is because bones are plastic, but a genetic change. So this is the issue, is that we know that people, and I'll speak more in broader terms, people were managing animals way before we knew that they were domesticated. And let me just be clear, gazelle were never domesticated, but we know that they were managing them, but somehow they were never domesticated. And when I say we know they're managing them, it's just because they have this relationship. They're the most, predated animal during this time period. People argue over the degree of management, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to figure out with my dissertation. So how managed were gazelle? Were they just very hunted? Did people try to cull certain or kill certain sexes, like get rid of more of the males to keep a breeding stock? How were they manipulating gazelle in the landscape? And it's something that we have, ideas about and people have written a lot about, but because of this issue of equifinality, which is that many processes can lead to the same outcome. So far, with the methods that we have available, body size is not, you can't exclude or say 100% that this factor is caused by this when you're looking at body size only. That's just because of this equifinality issue. So as archaeologists, we try to use multiple lines of evidence to craft, your interpretation, but it can be really challenging when you're working in this dynamic period where there's so much going on. So when I started this project and I was actually listed out all of the factors that could potentially impact just body size, not even talking about shape. So we're just strictly working with 2D linear measurements with calipers, that data that people have recorded. It is overwhelming how many things that can impact animal size. And within that, a lot of the literature is about the different environmental factors and how something like temperature versus precipitation can impact an animal. And the truth is that climatic variables, they co-vary. So it's even challenging to parse out climatic factors from each other. So, my dissertation is largely exploratory, but we're really excited because I have a huge reference collection of gazelles from the area that the archaeological gazelle bones are also from. So it's this incredible collection. I have about 65 animals so far that I've scanned of modern animals. So I know their sex, I know their age, and I know where they were collected from. So I'm able to have this information, and so what we're hoping is that this information is going to translate into the archaeological record, and if not, that's showbiz, right?
But if not, you can just write about how you did it, and it didn't,
exactly,
and it didn't work out.
So you're talking about these morphological changes to the bone.
Yes.
Is this something you can see with your eye? Does this have to be measured?
Yes.
It's a small change.
It's a minute change. Yeah. So we're talking about something that you cannot see with your naked eye. And that's when we turn to these new techniques. So much like Jayson was saying, how there's, multiple decades, you've seen just a push of research that's coming out of your area. Morphometrics has really opened up zooarchaeology and kind of what you can even ask from the archaeological record, because we just weren't able to see with that kind of resolution the changes. It was it wasn't fine-grained enough to be able to actually pinpoint these types of things. But morphometrics was a lot more common in biology and really adapted by biologists first, and it's taken us a while to integrate it into zooarchaeology, and that's it's quite interesting that it's been a part of biology for a while, and it's just slowly being integrated more into zooarchaeology. However, with this laboratory that I'm working with Dr. Leo Grossman, they are changing kind of the way that you do morphometrics on bone. They're writing specific algorithms or computer programs to look at animal bone based off of something called a complete model. So they're not looking at landmarks, like you don't pick a certain spot on the bone. They're trying to look at the complete shape and then through that isolate certain features.
You kids and your computers.
I think it's so typical though of archaeology. Like eventually we will steal your idea.
Yeah, that's true.
We're always
Find an application for it. Like,
we're always playing catch up, but we get there.
we get there, and then we're like, we can do things with this.
But that's kind of, I think, a really interesting point. The technology that's coming in that even a decade ago really wasn't being used, or at least that I'm aware of, in a lot of what the archaeology that I was aware that was going on.
And a lot of sorry to cut you off.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that, here in our region, I will say we were a little bit behind on the zooarch curve.
Because of preservation, probably, right?
Partially, yeah. But like 20 years ago, we were still mostly just producing species lists, at least for pre-contact assemblages. So we... just to see like this dramatic change in the kinds of information that people are getting from animal bones is really exciting.
And for a while, morphometrics, a lot of it in archaeology was done from pictures. So just having a picture of a bone and then superimposing landmarks and looking at shape comparisons that way. And it can tell you a lot, but it also at a certain point you're not going to be able to see the same thing from 3D morphometrics, and when you're really looking at the meshes of the 3D scan, the way that you can zoom in to a crazy level, because when you're looking at a photograph, there's a whole bunch of distortion that happens when you're trying to translate a 3D object into 2D space from the picture, and including things even as simple as the way that you're holding the camera could be distorting the image, and the lighting and depending on what bone you're interested in. Like, I'm fortunate because gazelle hind limb bones are not that small, but they're still not big. But they're not that small. But if you're working with something little like fish teeth, or the way that you're trying to place it in the clay and try to get the photograph, it can be challenging. And so 3D is the way of the future. So I better get on that train.
That was really great, and I'm really thrilled with the conversation that we had. But for the last 10 minutes, I want to kind of lighten it up a little bit, and I'm going to ask you to share. We've talked a little bit and we've had people on the show talking about working here in New England and the challenges. We've got our ticks and our poison ivy and our humidity and our heat stroke and things like that. But it was really interesting in talking about some of your experiences in the field, because you all work abroad in different areas. What's that been like? What are some of the challenges? Do you have any crazy stories you'd like to share?
Oh boy, do we.
Oh, yeah.
Is that like a smooth transition?
Yeah, I like it.
We're just going to cut that off.
We're going to we'll need a whole new episode. We could just talk for hours about the field.
We should, actually.
Well, I think for all of us, right, we all work in non-English speaking countries, and none of us know the language of where we work, because we all came into these regions later in life. So I think we could all agree that that's one challenge we run into is none of us know the language, and a lot of the, say, in the region that we work in, a lot of the older work was done by Russian teams during the Soviet period, and those records are kind of inaccessible to us. We get some translated and such, but it makes that kind of background research part hard, and it also makes like navigating field research kind of hard. Luckily, we have really great collaborators who shepherd us through the process. Otherwise, we'd be completely lost.
Now, are you really out in the field, or are you like going back to some house and sleeping at the end of the day?
So, most of where we've worked for like the last decade that I've worked in the region, we worked close enough to the capital city, so we stayed with a family in the city. More recently, we've been working up north, which is a little bit more out there. We stay at a hotel, in quotes. So, we do have some amenities, but we're not sleeping in tents or anything. But yeah,
Dig
it's still
houses.
dig houses, yeah.
Yeah.
But they're pretty basic. Most
Yeah,
of
the
them.
ones we stay up in the north are very.
Yes.
The hotel again quotes as very basic.
What are you talking about?
We
You have a pool.
We do have a pool. It's this old oil kind of tanker that's been cut in half and painted on the inside.
Pictures are phenomenal.
Yeah,
I'm not just painted a color, like painted with pictures.
Oh no!
No,
I
no,
just
no.
mean he sent me pictures
Oh,
of the field,
but
and
it's-
there was an oil
it's
refinery.
they painted it blue over the rust to make it look nice and make it look more like water when it's in there.
I have to say I'm spoiled because where I dig in Israel, we stay on a kibbutz, but it's on the Sea of Galilee. And so while we're still in like kibbutz dormitory, you can go swim in the Sea of Galilee every night, which is like paradise because it's 115 there and so hot. And so it feels amazing to go before your afternoon lab session to go for a dip.
What's the biggest like cultural difference that, you know, kind of took you by surprise? I mean, I'm assuming it's a way different atmosphere than here in lovely Connecticut.
When I dug in Turkey, which I only did for one season, I was in a really, really, really rural place, a very rural village. Like we ran out of water at one point because the well ran dry. And they gave me the keys to a Land Rover that was gifted to the project by the Queen of England like 30 years before. That was a Standard. And they told me to drive it. And I had driven a Standard. I could count on one hand. And I'm sitting there freaking out because I'm like, play it cool, but I need to do this. And, we worked with village men and they hadn't seen a woman drive. And that was a very big shift. I mean, that was crazy for me. I also stalled the car one time and had to jump it with a tractor and was trying to sign plus and minus. And I learned that the battery in these vehicles are under the driver's seat. So you have to straddle, and then there's the clutch. And I have never sweat more in my life.
A lot of pressure. You don't want to ruin the Queen's car, right?
Oh, and yes, no way. I couldn't be the one. But I found out later after I had apologized profusely to leaving the car in the side of the Anatolian steppe and having to walk back and say, oh no, I'm so sorry. I learned after that a person a couple years before had actually accidentally lit the car on fire somehow. I don't know. Like the engine started burning and they panicked. I don't know. So I thought, you know what? At least I don't go down in the books for that.
Yeah.
Is there any way you can compare the amount of respect and the import on a cultural journey point of view in your regions versus here at home on how important it is for one to better understand our collective tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years journey? Is it more respected? Is it more important in the lands in which you're working?
I would say in Armenia, especially, there is a kind of cultural importance of the history. I don't think it quite goes far back into our period, but I think to Armenians, their heritage is really important, especially since they have gone through a genocide themselves, and so ties to the past in that region for them is extremely important, and they really uplift their cultural heritage. They have wonderful museums and wonderful archaeological sites that they use for tourism. I mean, they have some sites down in southern Armenia, the site of Arni, which has some of the world's oldest evidence for wine production. The world's oldest leather shoe comes from that cave, and it's become this beautiful tourist spot that they've really built up. And this summer, we're actually going to go put a trench into the front of that cave looking for Paleolithic stuff, which they're probably not as interested in. But I think there's a lot of importance in our region, and same with up in Georgia too, where we also work on their cultural heritage, especially as these peoples try and renegotiate their identity after leaving the Soviet bloc. I think that's really pushed it hard for them.
And the Georgians and Armenians, they are in a bitter feud over who made wine first.
So whoever the archaeologist that comes up with that evidence in that region is going to be a hero.
All in one country.
Well, I do have, there's an example of that. We were in 2017, I was out there not doing real field work. I was just taking samples. I was just on a road trip, essentially, which is how you do field work. But we were pulled over by the Armenian police for speeding. It was me and this German professor in one car, and then there were the Armenians in a different car. And normally you just pay them. You have to essentially negotiate with the police about how much your fine is, right? And they pull us over, and we're trying to figure out what's happening. So our Armenian collaborator comes out, and he tells the police, we're on a scientific mission to Georgia, and he just lets us go. Like, it was that important to this police, like sort of on a national level, I guess, that we are representing Armenia, and we're going to, go to Georgia and spread how wonderful our science is.
That's fun.
And you get asked at that border by whatever guards you're going through which country is better.
Yeah.
So you always have to remember, right? You got to tell the Georgian guards Georgia's better. I've got to tell the Armenian guards Armenia is better. But both countries are wonderful. Just to put that on record.
Yes, they're wonderful.
But very, very different countries over just like the cultures are completely disconnected and different. It's really interesting to see.
Well, it's wrapping up quickly.
Yeah.
How about if people wanted to find you and send you notes and read your work or get updates on the gazelles or something?
I think in my case, you just go to the UConn Anthropology website, and we are all listed in the graduate student directory.
With our emails,
With our emails. But then these two hip kids have social media, I believe.
Yeah, you probably won't find me on the UConn website much longer anyway, as I'm moving on from my graduate career in 2 weeks.
Jayson is going to be a doctor.
congratulations.
He's not quitting. He's graduating.
But you can find me on Twitter at Jayson Gill Paleo, but that's Jayson with a Y. That's very important. So Jayson, in case you were wondering where that Y goes.
And I am also on the Department of Anthropology's website, but I have an academic Twitter, and it's at R Lebenzon, which is my last name, L-E-B as in boy, E-N, Z as in zebra, O-N. I believe that's my Twitter.
And it's the most complicated one.
And it's the most complicated one, but if I left you on a cliffhanger for the gazelle shape, please check back in the summer. Hopefully I'll have an update for you all.
So as always, you can follow us at osa.uconn.edu. There's been some updates to our recent fieldwork page, and the Facebook page for OSA. It's just Office of State Archaeology.
Yeah, and Friends is at fosa-ct.org, or follow us on Facebook.
Guys, thanks so much. This was fantastic stuff.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to listen to it about 10 more times. But I'll get it. I'll get it soon. Thanks so much for being part of ICR.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.